All right, next example, example 3. Algebraically determine the x and y intercepts for each function below. Use a calculator to round any irrational values. That's what we did on the last page. I rounded the irrational values. Okay, so first, let's find the x-intercept. X-intercept, set y equal to 0 and solve. So 0 equals 2 times x minus 7 squared. How will I solve? I set y equal to 0. You want to use that method. What method would be the easiest for this scenario for solving? I would think the square root method like we just did on the last page, because if I can isolate the square, I can undo it using the square root. Notice this is not in standard form, right? So before I take the square root, I wanted this 2 is being multiplied. So I want to divide both sides by 2. What's 0 divided by 2? 0 equals x minus 7 squared. Now how do I solve? Using the square root method, take the square root. Square root of 0, square root of x minus 7, because it's squared, right? So that square root undoes that square. What's the square root of 0? And we have x minus 7. So I don't have, this is the only time when I wouldn't use plus or minus, because 0 is like Switzerland, right? Supposedly it's neutral, yeah? And it's not positive or negative. So now how do I solve for x? What can I do to get x by itself? Add 7, right? So I get 7 equals x. That means my x-intercept is 7, 0. I only have one x-intercept for this one. Okay. How about the y-intercept? How am I going to find the y-intercept? Yes, set x to 0. That one's way easier. X equals 0. So we have, it's actually q of 0 equals 2 times 0 minus 7 squared. So once I plug in that 0, I can go ahead and simplify, right? So what do I get? What do I do first? Order of operations. Yes, parentheses. 7 minus 0 is negative 7. What's negative 7 squared? 2 times negative 7 squared equals 2 times 49. And I'll just write it here because I ran out of room. Double 49 and you get 98. So the y-intercept as an ordered pair is 0, 98. Really glad right now that we don't have to graph that. But another thing you can do, remember I mentioned the website Desmos, okay? So I'll just spell that out. Desmos. Get really comfortable when you're doing your homework. Get really comfortable using Desmos. You would literally just plug it in as you see it here, and you can click on those points to double check them, okay? So that would be a good resource for you, especially because you get to use that in 95. Okay, what about here? What are we going to do to find, let's do the x-intercept first. X-intercept, set y equal to 0. 0 equals 4x squared minus 5x plus 10. Oh, Lord, we need to try to factor it. But if we can't factor it, what other thing could we use? Yeah, so I'm already seeing that if I wanted to use the AC method, it's going to be 40 that has a sum of negative 5. I highly doubt we're going to find two factors that multiply to 40 that add to negative 5. Do you kind of see why that would be impossible? A positive 40? All the factors are going to be too big. Okay, and because they have to be the same signs. So that means I'm left to the quadratic formula. A equals 4. B equals negative 5, C equals 10. Before we continue on with that, isn't it much easier to find the y-intercept? Can I do the y-intercept mentally without even doing any calculations whatsoever? Oh, it's 10. What's the ordered pair? 0, 10. Does everybody see how he got the y-intercept so quickly? Questions about that? Set x to 0, and the only thing that's left is 10. Okay, so for this one, we're going to have to use the quadratic formula. We have x equals negative negative 5, negative negative 5, plus or minus the square root of negative 5 squared. So what number goes here? Negative 5 squared is going to be positive 25. This number here, b squared, will always be positive, no matter if b is negative or positive, because you'll always be squaring it. Minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times 4. Okay, now let's start to simplify. What's negative negative 5? Positive 5, right? Negative negative is a positive. 5 plus or minus the square root of 25 minus, what's all that? 100 and 160 all over 8. And then 5 plus or minus the square root of 25 minus 160 is negative 135 over 8. So we haven't talked about this yet, and we're going to talk about it in section 8.5. Section 8.5 about imaginary numbers. Right now, we would say there are no x-intercepts because this square root of a negative is a not real. And so what I want you to do is, if you're watching the video, go to Desmos, plug that in. You're going to notice that it will look like a parabola. It will cross at 10, but it will not touch down. I mean, it might look like this, might not look exactly like this, but the idea is it's not going to cross the x-axis. So we say there are no x-intercepts, and that's because you're taking the square root of a negative, which also means that it wasn't factorable at all. Okay, I'm going to pause now and let you guys go ahead and try the group work number 1, and then we'll pick up where we left off in the next video.